An interesting insight from Honcharenko. What does the member of parliament write? He says that he has reliable information, including from his own sources, that it turns out the United States of America set the deadline for negotiations between Ukraine and the Russian Federation. And this deadline is May 15th. It doesn't say which year here, but obviously it's 2026. My sources, writes Honcharenko, report that the US set the deadline for May 15th. If we don't reach an agreement, they will withdraw from the negotiation process and completely distance themselves from the issue. The reason is the elections in November. If they approach these elections with the conflict unresolved, the Republicans will become a target for the Democrats. And Honcharenko isn't letting up. He's been talking about this all day, including, for example, on the air of a certain news YouTube channel. So let's listen closely to a brief musical excerpt.
The Americans have their own internal political cycle. They have elections at the beginning of November. The campaign will already be underway by summer. And we shouldn't overestimate the importance of the Ukrainian issue in American domestic political discussions, but we also shouldn't underestimate it. That is, hypothetically speaking, if Trump manages to end the war, I don't think it will actually give him a huge boost in Republican votes in the US. But if he doesn't succeed, then it could definitely cost him from the point of view that people will say, well, you see, he was involved. He promised to do it in 24 hours. Almost 2 years have passed and nothing has happened. And he will definitely be the target of criticism. So really...
Well, it's clear what happens next. So here's the story. Could all of this really be such a significant factor for the domestic political situation inside the United States of America? Honcharenko answers his own question about whether it could, right? He says, I don't think it will really add or take away anything for anyone there. That's really true. And I think it's not worth overestimating the importance of the Ukraine issue. Deadlines until May 15th. Okay, I think there's a certain, suggested letter that outlines what we're working on today, tomorrow, the day after, and so on. Today, for example, we're dealing with Ukraine, Greenland, and Iran. And I think these issues are set for May 15th, which is actually in about 5 months, a little less. By then, these issues will no longer be relevant. There is a slowly unfolding and complex political process. And are Donald Trump's public approval ratings beginning to decline because he is currently unable to bring a definitive end to the ongoing war in Europe, particularly the conflict in Ukraine? I don't know, but Trump's ratings are falling anyway. Look, here we have a slide from the latest study. This is Trump's approval rating among Americans, which has dropped to 38%. This is a poll conducted by Reuters. According to the results of this poll, Trump's overall approval rating fell to 38%, which matches the lowest level during his current term in office. In the previous poll, which Reuters conducted on January 12th and 13th of this year, this figure was 41%. So clearly there are events that Americans strongly dislike, and a 3% drop is occurring. The decline in support, in particular, is linked to the administration's immigration policy. Only 39% of Americans approve of Trump's actions in the field of immigration, while 53% of respondents said they do not support his approach. At the beginning of the month, the approval rating in this area was 41%. And there you have your explanation. So, of course, the main point, yes, on which a president, whether Democrat or Republican, rides into the Oval Office on that white horse is, of course, migration policy, migration and immigration policy. The problem of Texas, the problem of the border with Mexico, this is all a very serious issue for the domestic political situation in the United States of America. Ukraine is clearly not in first place there, even though the international arena is quite important. Trump wants the Nobel Peace Prize. Has he earned that Nobel Peace Prize? I think that after Venezuela, obviously half the world will say no. And the other half of the world will say no after what's happening with Greenland. Now, the Ukraine issue. The publication Politico has come out with an interesting piece. By the way, not just this publication. There's also a huge analytical article in the Financial Times. I'll talk about that in a moment. So what is Politico writing about? It says that the United States is ready to negotiate with Ukraine, specifically to agree essentially on the territorial issue. So agreeing on the territorial issue means that Ukraine would withdraw from the parts of Donbas not occupied by Russia, and in return might possibly receive security guarantees later on. According to European diplomats who shared their perspective with Politico, it was Secretary of State Marco Rubio who voiced this position during negotiations with partners in Europe. The US assured that if this condition is met, Trump would supposedly provide Ukraine with strong security guarantees. The article does not specify exactly what kind of security guarantees are being discussed. At the same time, Washington insists on the swift signing of the entire package of agreements. So this is not the first attempt. We understand to put pressure on Ukraine, and this is happening right after another trip by Witkoff there, together with Jared Kushner. It doesn't matter. Witkoff to Putin, who is already being called a legend in Moscow. You heard that, right? That phrase from Ushakov that he's simply a legendary figure and personality. Now, regarding the Financial Times. The journalists at the Financial Times are digging a bit deeper into this. They say that Washington has hinted it will provide more weapons, including to Ukraine, to strengthen its army in peacetime, if Ukraine agrees to withdraw its forces from part of the eastern region it currently controls. Yes. Zelensky hopes to sign documents regarding guarantees and a so-called post-war prosperity plan with the US as early as this month in January. And this would give Kyiv leverage in future negotiations with Moscow. However, Washington is now, according to the Financial Times, signaling that American security commitments depend on reaching agreements with Russia. Ukrainian and European officials have described the US position as an attempt to force Kyiv into making territorial concessions. They pause every time security guarantees are ready to be signed. This is a quote, after the meeting between Trump and Zelensky in Washington last month, American officials stated that the offer of American security guarantees would not remain on the table forever. And this phrase, friends, an offer that won't be on the table forever. Look, now let's read Honcharенko again. The US set a deadline for the negotiations until the 15th of May. Judging by everything, it's not about pulling out of the negotiations, but rather about that model, if you like. Call it the Anchorage model, the Witkoff-Kushner model, the Trump-Putin model. This model, which is currently being used by the White House and by Donald Trump and his administration, well, this model, this proposal will not be on the table forever. And most likely, all of this could come to an end in May. Ukraine wants to secure security guarantees before giving up any territory. However, according to Kyiv, it is Donbas that should be given up first in order to end the war, and little is being done to put pressure on Putin. This is what they say in the office of the Ukrainian president. So if we believe the Financial Times, Ukraine is ready. Ukraine is playing these deadline games and so on. So this is, well, right now we're analyzing the points being made around us in reputable publications and even by Ukrainian politicians. In other words, Ukraine is playing this game. Ukraine is preparing to give up the territory of Donbas, if we believe the Financial Times. And it can do this within a set time frame. This never-ending proposal that's on the table but requires strong guarantees. What happens next? So what happens next? Next, Dmitriev, who has been in the United Arab Emirates and has basically settled in Miami, meets with Witkoff and other negotiators. He just responded now, and I think it's very inappropriate, a diplomat of that level. But what is he reacting to? He's reacting to a post by a Financial Times journalist, one of the authors of the article I just quoted. Christopher Miller wrote the following: Indeed, Russians' withdrawal from Donbas and their complete withdrawal from Ukraine is the path to peace. In other words, the withdrawal of Russian forces from the Donbas region represents the primary solution for the nation of Ukraine. Essentially, this specific action serves as the definitive path forward, a pathway toward achieving a lasting peace, which truly means finding a sustainable way to restore harmony and stability. And then, following that statement, the prominent journalist Christopher Miller makes another detailed post on social media, stating quite clearly, we both, you and I, both intimately know the reality that as long as the Russian military troops continue to remain stationed on sovereign Ukrainian soil, there will simply be no possibility for a lasting peace between these nations, right? Occupation is not peace. And here, well, this is an absolute truth. We understand that it's about concessions, but still, according to Christopher Miller, it's occupation. And Dmitriev couldn't hold back and wrote this, also playing on that you and I both know phrase. Kirill Dmitriev starts with this too. We both know that this push, this feverish push of fakes, of British narratives, delays or cancels. Delay, yes, cancels peace. So these are British narratives, obviously. This, this is once again a war against these ephemeral Anglo-Saxons, which is deeply rooted in Dmitriev's mind. And not just Dmitriev, but all these Kremlin creatures. Here it is, right here. And what does this actually mean? It means a matter of principle. It means the position regarding this agreement, which is now coordinated with Donald Trump. An agreement that's on the table, but it's not permanent, and it's under pressure from this whole migration crisis situation. And you have to realize that Russia, listen, it is not just some kind of foolish or simple enemy. They are absolutely not foolish. In fact, he plays strategically on the very same geopolitical field that Donald Trump allows him to play on, taking every advantage he is given. So yes, I believe in this date. Now, after this detailed and thorough analysis, it becomes very clear. I truly believe that this particular story simply cannot continue to go on forever. May 15th or not May 15th, okay? Here we found a date with you that could be a starting point, a moment when the United States' attention could completely shift away from the issue of Ukraine. The start of these midterm elections, yes, that could be it.